Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm Risto Penttila. I wear many hats, but today the hat I'm wearing is that of the Secretary General of European Business Leaders Convention. Our chair, Jorma Ollila, will say a few words about the initiative. It's 15 years old already, but this is something new we are doing for the first time. But Jorma will say a few words about that in a minute. Just a couple of practical announcements before we start. You all have microphones at your table, and we do hope that you use them. But there's a little thing you have to remember. You have to turn it on when you start and off when you finish. So that's number one. Number two is that this is an open forum. So please feel free to tweet. The hashtag is hashtag New Generation, hashtag EBLC2. 2017, or take pictures, whatever. So this is an open forum. And my final point is that there's another session that we are organizing quite soon. So after we finish here, if I can ask you to move to the lobby and continue the discussion there. And now it's my great privilege and honor to introduce our chairman, Jorma Ollila, who's going to say a few words to open our session. Jorma, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's really great to see such a crowd of very keen faces with great expressions on your face. I really saw everybody coming here literally a minute ago from my country place where I spent a day or so in between. Arriving from West Coast of the US, and there's a story to tell always when you come back from that part of the world. But really, I want to wish you all welcome to the Finland 100 Business Forum, which we entitle Is the New Generation Ready to Lead? Personally, I think it is, but in fact, we are here to find out. So keen to see what will come out of that. Before introducing today's moderator, let me explain a little bit of context on what we have been working on in getting our forum into its current shape, or this forum through a context during the past 15 years. The European Business Leaders Convention was founded, as Risto noted, 15 years ago here in Helsinki. The idea that we had was to bring European business leaders and experts together to discuss European integration and Europe's relations with the rest of the world from the point of view of European business. Since then, we have met several times in Helsinki, almost every year, not quite, and in the years in between, in London, Brussels, St. Petersburg, and Moscow. This year, we decided to expand our community. We decided to invite a new generation of leaders from Europe and United States to our meeting. Furthermore, we decided to arrange a discussion where Finnish entrepreneurs, young researchers, and some of our delegates can exchange notes on where the world is going and how the younger generation sees it. The hope is that we will get a broader and hopefully a more interesting view than we would get by simply talking among senior leaders of established companies. So, dear friends, I do hope you will participate in the discussion, test ideas and challenge your own thinking. I also hope that you will find out the questionnaire that will be sent to you afterwards. We want to hear whether your views on this meeting should be repeated, whether in your view this meeting should be repeated, and if so, how should we develop it? Now it's my a great pleasure to introduce our moderator. He is Nick Gowing.
I'm here.
Nick, you are there. Nick is an international broadcaster known in all of the 5 continents. He cannot walk in the streets of Mumbai or Shanghai without people recognizing him. He cannot attend a conference without someone asking him to moderate another event. In short, he is one of the leading facilitators in the world. Nick has been involved with European business leaders from the very beginning. It's my great pleasure to introduce him to you. Nick, thanks for joining us again. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorma. And I'm standing here. I'm standing here really to underline that this is not an experiment. This is about conversation for the next hour and a half, because we want you to be part of this. This is not token. This is not just to say the next generation, the new generation are being talked about and talked to. This is about understanding that there's fundamental change going on in this world, and the new generation have a different view. I come from the United Kingdom. You know what happened in our election when the Prime Minister got a bloody nose because she didn't understand the next generation, the new generation. So there are some fundamental, some very profound things which we need to get on the agenda. And certainly, although I have no official role in the conference, I've been here for a few years and I've sort of said, look, you've got to get the next generation involved. Otherwise, the other people who are going to be sitting here are going to be speaking in a bit of a vacuum, because there's a new generation and new ideas and they're moving very fast. And there's a lot of rejection going on of the politics and the business principles being adopted by so many out there, and most are not really getting it. I'm doing a big project on thinking the unthinkable, and the one finding is the conformity which gets you to the top disqualifies you in many ways from understanding the enormity of change. It's that profound. So that's the spirit. I'm standing here because I wanted to be conversation. Do please tweet. Do tell people out there what's going on. But I'm going to come to you in a moment before we go to Anders Borg and Alex Stubb to hear their view. And I'm going to ask each of the 5 representative panelists to introduce themselves, because they'll get it better and more accurately than I will. But when I've introduced them, or ask them to introduce themselves, I'd like to come to any of you to say what else should be on the agenda in the next hour and a half. You can help set this agenda. There's nothing prescriptive in this kind of gathering. Each of you have got on the table a microphone. I'll tell you why we're doing that, because this time last year, Putin was in town, and we discovered that all the microphones didn't work properly, or maybe someone else was listening. So each of your tables now has a wired microphone and a number. So our colleagues on the AV desk will then open that mic. But do see this as an opportunity. Don't wait till the end. Think about the beginning, what else you want on the agenda. And I'm coming to you in 3 minutes to see if anyone wants to put anything on the agenda before we hear from Alex and Anders. Right, let me now introduce each of the panelists. Representative of all of you here, let me first go to April in the middle. What do you do? 30 seconds.
Advisor, focusing on new business models, the new economy, specifically the sharing economy, if you've heard of that. And themes that I focus on along with this include policy reform, the future of work, and global citizenship.
Kasper.
Hi, my name is Kasper Korjus. I'm from Estonia. I'm the managing director of e-residency. So I started to lead this 2.5 years ago. E-residency, by e-residency, we are turning Estonian nation to a global nation. So we are starting to serve everybody internationally, so everybody can become our digital citizens. And it's thrilled, and I can share some thoughts later. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Ulrika.
Hi, my name is Urshka Srshen, and I'm the co-founder and CPO of Bellabit, a company developing health tracking devices for women and AI that supports them. And I'm based between Europe and China, focusing on manufacturing processes and design of technology for our users.
Urshka, thank you. Ella.
Hi, my name is Ella Madej. I'm originally Polish. I live in San Francisco. I started, my background is in software, and I co-founded what is now a few $100 million enterprise software company. Was a partner at a venture fund, the premier venture fund focused on Eastern Europe. Right now, I run a fund, an investment fund called 50 Years. We invest in companies that are using advanced technology to solve the world's biggest problems, for-profit companies. So we've invested in cultured meat, satellites to cover the world in internet, clean chemicals, and 28 other companies with this fund.
Thank you, Ella. Rajib.
Hi everyone, my name's Rajib Day. Never had a proper job, always been an entrepreneur.
Have you got one now?
I do as an entrepreneur, I would say. Some people would argue it's not a proper job. So running kind of social enterprises for school kids, set up a Startup Britain, a campaign with the Prime Minister to promote entrepreneurship, and run a company called Learnably, which helps your employees be their best selves at work by curating the best professional learning content.
Thanks indeed. Now, can I apologise for having my back to you? If you want to move forward, there are plenty of seats at the front, then you don't have to try and find a way through my back. But I've got to stand somewhere, so do please move. Right, each of our panelists is going to talk for 3 or 4 minutes in a moment to tell us more about the kind of generational challenges there are. But anyone want to come into the discussion at this moment and say, I want you to be talking about this? We have a silent new generation. All right, I'll hold you to that. Right, you can come in at any point, just even if you want to interrupt, just use the microphone, please, because it is meant to be interactive and conversational. So let me ask now, first of all, Anders Borg to come and give his reflections. Swedish economist and politician, former finance minister. Anders, your reflections on what's happening in the world, particularly on economics and politics. Is it all clear sailing?
Thank you very much. I will give you basically 3 reflections under the headline, The New World Disorder. My thesis is very simple. We have a new world disorder. This disorder will remain for the next 5 or 6 decades, so get used to it. It won't change. I will argue that there are 3 fundamental changes that are really changing our world disorder. I came out of Africa last week. If you go back to 1850, you had the Zulu Wars in South Africa, where Western armies were beaten up by the Zulu armies with their spears and their bows. A decade or 2 later, we had a Gatling gun. After the Gatling gun was introduced, we had a Western dominance for more than 100 years. When the Brits took over South Sudan, 10,000 warriors were killed, and the Brits lost 2 in that war. So you established a world order that we've seen for almost 100 years now, where Western technology, Western economics, Western politics have been deciding the world order. And that is now basically come to an end. If you go back to 1990, we had 1 billion consumers, all of them in the global, in the Western world, and we had around 3 billion poor people. Today, you have less than 1 billion living in extreme poverty, and more than 3 billion middle-class consumers globally. Less than 1 billion of them are from the Western European countries. The next 2 decades, or the next decade, we will come to 5 and 6 billion global middle-class consumers. Basically, we are adding almost 200 million global consumers every year, and global poverty is likely to be eradicated within the next 10 to 15 years. All of that growth is basically happening in Asia. It's not happening in Europe. It's not happening in the US. The whole gravity of the global economy is moving back to Asia. And you have to understand how fundamental this is. If you go back 10 years, China were producing 10 million cars. Last year, they produced 25 million cars. They are still at around 100 cars per 1,000 inhabitants. So with the current growth rates of car sales of more than 10%, they're adding 2.5 million new cars every year, and they are not going to stabilize until they produce something like 50 to 75 million cars per year. That is a complete change, because in Europe and the US, we will still be producing some 20, 25 million cars, and the bulk of car production will therefore have moved to Asia. What they've done is basically, when I did my PhD studies in economics, we were talking about the convergence paradox. Technology was global, but the countries did not converge. Poor countries remained poor, and rich countries were moving ahead. Basically, since then, that has been turned on the head. Technology has, by foreign direct investments, been moved to Asia, and you've had a period of 40 years with 10% growth in China. 10% growth for 40 years, 45-folds your GDP per capita. That's what Sweden and Finland did in 160 years. We have this year more than 3 billion people growing at 6% in Asia. They are tripling their GDP in a decade. So this is going very, very fast, and it moves in that direction. And there's very strong fundamental reasons for why we should believe in this. The macroeconomic stability you have in Asia is superb. Low current account deficits, price stability, low public indebtedness. They are doing a number of good structural reforms with the consumer tax reform that they're doing now in India, but you'll see very similar stuff in the others. So basically, in terms of technology, economics, and politics, the world is moving back to Asia. And that will remain so for at least 1 or 2 more decades until we actually see how South Asia takes over the leadership. And then again, growth will move to Africa. And you will not see Africa stabilizing in population and in global presence until 2050, 2075, in that neighborhood, where Africa will have around 40% of all global youth. So for all remaining time, globalization will be an ongoing phenomenon, and the Western world will become less important, and the rest of the world become even more important. So that's my first point, and it's an enormous shift that is now happening. I serve on the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank Advisory Board. We spent a week in Korea 2 weeks ago just going through all of the infrastructure investments that are now being planned in Asia. Just to give you the perspective, India is planning 50 new airports. And that's just one part of it. So Asia is moving ahead, and that will shift our global world order to in that direction. My second thesis is that we basically have a much more rapid pace of technological change than before. It's pretty obvious that we now all have seen the Silicon Valley model, how you very rapidly scale up new innovations. I work with Kinnevik, so we run e-commerce companies in digital economy basically everywhere, in emerging markets ranging from Zalando in Germany to Linio in Mexico to Lazada in Indonesia and Zalora in Southeast Asia. So we basically run global companies. All of these companies are less than 10 years old. They now are 60% of the asset value of Kinnevik. All of them has been created in less than a decade. It used to be that H&M were 10 times more valuable than Zalando. Today it's 4 times more valuable. And if you go forward, it's pretty likely that Zalando and H&M will be pretty similar and large-sized companies in Europe. So digitalization makes it possible to scale out everything in a very rapid pace. But even more fundamentally, we have never had a population globally that is as well educated as it is today. Regardless of where you go in Africa, young people are good educated. They have tuition everywhere. You see ads for tuition in the afternoons, for English, for mathematics, for science. So the globe is much better educated than ever been. Last year, the scientific publications increased with 9%. It used to be that we double our scientific knowledge every 40 years. Now we do it every 8 years. So it is an enormous rapid pace of new research that is produced. And it's produced and made globally available automatically. It's pretty clear that the combination of Silicon Valley capitalism and this huge rapid increase of knowledge will produce a lot of technological disruption. And I think what we're seeing now in the financial sector or in retails, that is only going to be replicated elsewhere. So there is nothing that can anymore be a permanent technological domination. You can earn out of technology, but the change is much more rapid than it has been. My third point, if these two are optimistic, my third point is that we're also going to see much more global conflicts going forward. We are going to live in a world that is politically volatile and difficult. I mean, the first reason for this is obvious that inequality has increased. But it's also the fact that we have next to Europe, North Africa and the Middle East, where they've been unable to do anything that is similar to what we've seen in Asia in terms of growth. You have not seen any of the Middle East countries really growing fast and in a pace that can transform their countries. But there are around 350 to 400 million people in that region. The inability to have economic development there will bring Europe to a long period of migration. If you use the Latin America, US example, you could say that it's likely that we will have excessive migration out of Africa and North Africa, at least up until 2050. So it's not that the current refugee crisis is a new thing that will go away when the conflict in Syria and Iraq calms down. We are going to see economic migration out of Africa for at least 4 or 5 decades in a scale that we have not seen before, and that will be create a lot of pressure. My second point, my last point will be actually that when we're here, I think we'll also have the increasing conflicts that is surrounding the fact that we don't have economic development in this rapid pace in Russia. And Russia is, with its demographics and its political system and its economic system, declining. And that is creating tension around a country that is equal to 1/8 of the global geography. And that is neighboring to basically all other countries. And that is a source of conflict and worries that I think will remain with us. So these are my 3 basic theses. We have a new global disorder. We will have a new economic, politically world order that is shifted to Asia. We are going to see very rapid technological change with a lot of disruption. That is not going to go away either. And we're going to see more conflicts because a lot of these changes are also having political and economic implications of a broader scale. So that's my 3 points underlining the thesis that I was given. We have a new world disorder, and it will remain in this order for any foreseeable future.
Thanks, Anders. All right, we're already 20 minutes into an hour and 3/4. Anyone want to come in immediately? I'd like you to feel you can come back at any point. So anyone want to come in, check anything out with Anders before we go to Alex? Please, yes, use the microphone. It's number 19. And do introduce yourselves as well, because you are here to answer the question, is the new generation ready to lead? That's you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Hannah Roos. I'm a lawyer in London, originally from Finland. I wanted to thank you for the very interesting thoughts. I wanted to add a question. We talk about economic and political power and how that's changing. We should be asking, are we missing something? Should we be talking about moral leadership as well in the world? Maybe that doesn't need to be shifting with economics, or maybe that can be driving economic power balance. For example, in climate change, we have now the Paris Accord, and maybe the thought leadership piece can be coming from, or can be leading economic change. So we don't need to be following economic change.
That's a profound issue which keeps coming through time and time again. Courage, humility, purpose as well. Let's pick up. Anyone else want to come in before we go to Alex, please?
11. Hi. Oh, you got that. Hi, Travis Bradford, Columbia University. You know, I certainly applaud the vision of a linear extrapolation growth model where everybody's better off. We sort of the economies that are, you know, we can close the gap in terms of relative wealth, and this will happen in sequence around Asia and South Asia and Africa. But I really do worry, and it's sort of tied to the previous question. At some point, there are limits to that growth, and I want to, you know, and this force of sort of innovation is always resisted by sort of the notion of depletion and depletion of resources, depletion of sinks for the environmental consequences of what we do. Climate change is just one example of that. We also may run out of vital resources or many other, you know, essential components to economic.
So I'm going to turn it on you, Travis. How are people like you going to lead in future?
Well, that's a longer question.
All right, we'll come back with an answer after the interventions. But I need to come back with you because that's the challenge.
Yep.
All right.
Indeed.
Anyone else, please? Can I see a mic? Yes, please. Number 31. 31? It should go on by itself.
All right. Now it works. It wasn't my fault.
This is the blame game.
Edward Blomstedt, or Eddie. My question is actually about what I see in a switch in generations from, let's say, a religious stigma of the Bible ruling how we are supposed to lead our lives and economies and so on, to a more state-led thing happening in the last centuries, going towards a more digital era where I think state borders are less important, and let's hope at least brain power is the one that gets to rule. So that should, in many ways, transform much of where the economy is heading and how work is done and where it's done and so on. So just wanting your opinions on how that sort of shift from a power structure.
Right, we're just putting stuff on the table at the moment. Anyone else before I go to Alex Stubb? Anyone else? Please, over there.
Carlo Bertinetto from Aalto University. It's a widespread opinion that in the future there will be less time spent working and more time spent learning. How do you think people would adapt to that? I mean, I'm a researcher. It's natural that learning is part of my job, but I don't know, a policeman or many people are still used to the idea. I study at the beginning of my life, then I do this. I apply what I learned for 40 years until I retire. Yeah.
Right. I'm putting all this on the table at the moment. Alex, would you like to come and give your thoughts? Because until recently, you were, after all, Prime Minister. You're about to be Vice President of the European Investment Bank as well. You had to think about these issues, particularly the different kind of moral leadership, which the next generation, it comes through time and time again. And we've seen this in the results in the United Kingdom. Whether those voting for Corbyn believe in Corbyn, it was actually a vote against the status quo.
Yeah. Sure. Thanks, Nick, and good afternoon to all of you. I was getting a little bit worried when no one sort of picked up the mic when Nick asked his first question, but you see, you should all realize that we Finns are a little bit shy. And you know what the difference is between an introvert and an extrovert Finn, right? Well, the introvert, when he speaks to you, he looks at his own feet, and the extrovert, when he speaks to you, looks at your feet. So, you know, we get going slowly. Now, I've been asked actually to comment Anders's 3 points, and I will try to do that. My thesis is to give you a direct answer to today's panel. It's not a question of can the new or next generation lead. I think the thesis is the next generation is already leading and will lead. Now, before I jump into the 3 points, just remember one thing. When we are at these types of seminars or when we're trying to analyze the world, we usually do one of two things. We either overestimate short-term change, but most often underestimate long-term change. So we get very sort of muddled into what is going on, almost emotional about it, thinking that the world will change right now, and we get hyped up about it. But as a matter of fact, it changes a little bit, more slowly than we think. Now, my 3 points to answer Anders' 3 point about a shift. Number one, I think we need to look at 3 key dates which have molded where we stand. Anders went back a few hundred years to Western dominance. I'll just start with 3 key dates. Number one is 1945. End of World War II, the creation of a bipolar world, Soviet Union, United States, and the creation of the international world order as we know it today, which has been dominated indeed by Western values. To come back to the question from the Finnish Londoner, it's been dominated by liberal democracy, market economy, and globalization, and very much driven by the West. That's the world that most of us got used to. Then came date number 2, which is obviously 1989, and I sort of call it the era of hope, because that's when the Berlin Wall came down. 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, communism lost to capitalism, authoritarian regimes lost to democracy. Nelson Mandela is freed, East and Western Europe meet again, and the system that the United States and Western Europe had created post-World War II basically won, hands down. Now, that's the era that I have lived in for the 25 years that followed. It was an era sort of hope. Yes, I'm not saying that 9/11 wasn't awful. I'm not saying that Srebrenica or Kosovo wasn't awful. I'm not saying that Iraq wasn't awful. I'm not saying that the war in Georgia wasn't awful or Ukraine wasn't awful. Yes, it was, and we didn't eradicate all conflicts. But the bottom line is that it's been an era of relative peace. And in this period, we have been able to basically almost get rid of 3 things that used to kill mankind. Number 1 was disease. Number 2 was wars. And then number 3 was food and malnutrition. Now, it's been a good period, and that's why I'm very optimistic about it. But then came the third date that I wanted to highlight, and that was 2016. And obviously 2 things which I would argue shifted the tectonic plates, much like Anders said, of the Western world. One was Brexit, and the other one was the election of Donald Trump. I would argue that this was the beginning of a certain demise of the West, but certainly the beginning of a demise of the Anglo-Saxon world, because both the United Kingdom and the United States are right now voluntarily marginalizing themselves from world politics. I'll take the United States as an example. If you say no to globalization, if you say no to migration, if you say no to free trade, if you say yes to protectionism, if you say yes to nationalism, if you say yes to America first, then it's very difficult to lead the world. And secondly, the United Kingdom basically detaching itself from the biggest economy in the world, which is the internal market of the European Union. So these 3 key dates, I think, you have seen the rise of the West and the downfall of the West through 1945, 1989, and 2016. Am I giving up all hope? No. But am I saying that just because of the Dutch election or the French election or potentially the upcoming German election, everything is going to be lovey-dovey and dandy for the West? The answer to that is no. Second point, technological change. And obviously this is where the next generation comes in. I'll make 2 points on this. First, I look at my own children. They don't remember time before smartphones. Their children will not go to school in a vehicle which has a driver. Not sure even if that vehicle will be owned by any particular individual or person. Their children will be diagnosed better by AI and probably a microchip under their skin than by a doctor. They will, in their lifetime, see a tremendous shift in the labor markets. They will see a tremendous shift in the whole way in which society is going to be run. We are moving towards a world, I would argue, where at some stage we move from Homo sapiens to cyborgs and then one step further. Not probably during the time yet of my children, but we're moving in that direction. My second point is, this brings us to fundamental ethical questions about what mankind is. There was a reference to the Bible here earlier. Anyone who hasn't yet read Harari, either Homo sapiens or Homo Deus, I would warmly recommend that. And we are going into fundamental questions about what mankind is. And the question is, who is going to take those decisions? Are they going to be based on what we would call Western or universal values, or are they going to be based on something else? I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. Neural laces and with our beginning of communication with different kinds of devices. What when we move into the next phase? You have a 10-year-old child who is terminally ill, but you have a magic potion that can save that child. What will you do? Obviously, you will give the child the medication. Your child is deprived of, say, mathematical skills, as I am and was. What will you do? Will you give a magic potion that makes that child a little bit wiser and gives him or her a better opportunity? Morally and ethically, a bit questionable. You go to North Korea, well, they are doing it. I'm going to do it as well. What is going to happen at the final moment when artificial intelligence reaches the level whereby you have to take a decision when you plug it into the neck of a human being, whether that human being is going to be good or bad? This is not only about cloning, this is not only about genetic manipulation, this is not only about your DNA. I would argue it's about the future of mankind. That's why I think we should look long term. So technological development is going to be tremendous. I remind you, we have a tendency to exaggerate short term, but underestimate long term. My final point is about more conflicts. Here, is where I should probably, as the future chairman of the Crisis Management Initiative and Martti Ahtisaari say that yes, that is probably the case and we're going to need a lot of peace mediation. But I will not. I am more optimistic about it. Yes, climate change has the potential of increasing conflicts. Yes, people who are deprived of economic opportunity will lead themselves into sudden migratory moves, and this could potentially increase conflicts not only in Europe but also elsewhere. But I would still argue that if we look at the statistics of conflicts, they have been coming down, admittingly, until 2008, 2009, and they have gone up. But here is where I would argue you can also use technology. We are soon approaching the time when artificial intelligence will be better at solving conflicts than human beings in regular peace mediation settings. And I think this gives us a wonderful opportunity. So here, ladies and gentlemen, very shortly, is a political scientist's answer to an economist on 3 issues. Number 1, the change in world politics. Someone is going to have to fill the power vacuum. Number 2, a change in technology. And number 3, the notion of more conflicts. Let me just give you a final concluding word and throw a question at you. If and when the United States is voluntarily leaving the world stage, the question is who is going to fill that power vacuum? I would argue that Europe needs to fill it in values and in trade. I would argue that China will try to fill it in terms of taking a lead on globalization, technology, and free trade. And I would argue that Russia will try to increase its military might. There, however, we should keep in mind that the US still spends something like $600 billion on defense. That is more than all the rest of the world put together. Thanks.
I've come up here because if any of you are introverts, you can now see my shoes and become more extrovert. You've got an hour. Anyone want to pick up immediately on 19? Just pick up on anything that Alex has just said, please. And then on
Hello,
23.
my name is Jonathan Roos. I'm an eye surgeon educated in Cambridge and Harvard. And my job at this conference is to keep the next generation very quiet, because I'm also Hannah Roos's husband, who spoke earlier. I just wanted to say something to Mr. Stubb, whose columns in the Blue Wings magazine I enjoy greatly. But we've been talking here about the downfall of the Western model, Western society. I would argue that it's the downfall of the Anglican model. What you have is a British, and their expats, the Americans, who have been running a sort of a system of capitalism on steroids, which has left a large segment of their societies behind. So if you look at how the countries, how those 2 countries vote for these important things, where we suddenly think there's huge disruption and despair, it's pretty much half and half. Half the people want to carry on in a certain way, half the people feel left behind and are confused. And so I think what really we're seeing now is a vacuum in leadership. How do we integrate? And I think this is where the Scandinavian model may be able to lead, which is where we don't try to just marginalize large segments of society, but we really need to share the wealth and share the proceeds and share innovation. Because at the moment we have massive companies paying very little tax, contributing, and that's what's leading to this Corbyn stuff.
Thank you very much indeed. 23, please. And also, I can't see your number.
Hi, Eero Vilkuna, Kesko. Little bit shorter question is that this power vacuum is it really truly possible that one-man presidency term like Donald Trump can truly make such a difference in such a short time period to this vacuum?
Just pick up on that in a moment, Alex. Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't see your number. 12.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Grönstrand from NOAA Global. My question is that you said, Alex, that new generation is already leading. And you said also that everyone in a new generation has born with the smartphones. So what kind of digital solutions they are expecting from those large corporations to have that they are willing to lead.
Thank you. Was there one behind you? Was there one more behind? Did I see another hand go up? Okay. Anyone else, quickly? Right, Alex, do you want to come in on just quickly on those 3 points, and then I'm going to go to the panel.
Sure. By the way, when you say the table numbers, I think we're in a bingo or something. Number 23. Wait.
It may come down to that.
Yeah.
But how do you do bingo on Bitcoin?
Good question for the future. On the 3 points, first, downfall of the Anglo-Saxon model, I actually fully agree. But obviously with the UK and US, there is a certain difference. I mean, the UK is, after all, a welfare state in comparison to what I would argue the US is. I do think that the increase in income gaps, inequality, those are the future issues that we are going to have to tackle. And obviously, you know, if I was a dictator in the world, albeit I firmly believe in liberal democracy, I would love to see the Nordic model being basically juxtaposed on the rest of the world, because for me it is a combination of a welfare state and free enterprise and entrepreneur. But obviously if you live in Scandinavia, you will have a lot of people saying that no, the system doesn't work, there's too much regulation and the rest of it. But the point that you made is correct. Vacuum in leadership, I agree, but this actually brings me also to the third question: is the new generation already leading? I'll be a little bit pessimistic about this. I actually think that the new generation is leading because it is more entrepreneurial and more focused on economic enterprise and technology. I actually think that we're seeing a demise of the democratic model of governance. If you look at people who lead in politics nowadays, it is probably one of the toughest businesses that you can be in. To be very honest, the compensation for the shit that you get is just, you know, it doesn't match. So my question and my fear is that a lot of people in the future will not want to go into politics. I look at you, the new generation. How many of you want to become politicians?
Question: who wants to become a politician?
Okay, there's not one hand up.
Hang on, let's just check.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to become a politician?
Yeah. And there's a reason for this, because people see when you go into the public domain and you basically become you know, predatorial food for the public eye, mainly journalists. Of course, not you, Nick. I mean, in any way.
Alex, you always took the phone call from me.
I always did. But the bottom line is that this is my big fear. So the new generation will lead on the economic side, not necessarily on the political, because I think that actually legislation and other things will be better done in the future by technology. The final question was on the power vacuum. Can only one person do it? The question came from right there. You're absolutely correct. No, it cannot. The good news is that Donald Trump is not permanent. The bad news is Brexit is. Now, Donald Trump will be contained by the administration and by the US Constitution. But in 4 years or in 8 years, he will be able to project a lot of damage to US global leadership, to the democratic system of governance in the US and elsewhere. And my big fear is that it's going to take a long time for the United States to come back after the presidency of Donald Trump.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to go to the panel in a moment. Just before you both sit down, or just take a back seat for the moment, do you think your contemporaries and your peers, whichever nation you're talking about, really get the enormity of what you just described, both of you? Yes or no? Anders?
Well, I don't think that people understand how dramatic the shift is, not the least here in Europe. Europe is, with an aging population, becoming less and less important, and will also be marginalized in terms of share of world population. So I don't really think that people understand. They spend too little time in Asia, and they don't really understand how big the shift in the global economy is.
Alex, do those you're working with, either in Finland or elsewhere, really understand it?
There has to be two answers to that. I think on a political level, they do. So you look at someone like Emmanuel Macron, or you look at someone like Angela Merkel, they fully realize that there is a huge shift in world politics right now. That's why they're talking about European leadership. Life was easy when Germany could rely on the United Kingdom, on the internal market, or when they could rely on the backing of the United States for European integration. But when you have to do it yourself, you have to take responsibility. The second answer is no, and I write for the Financial Times, and I did write a piece a little while back trying to wake up political decision makers to the fourth industrial revolution. So to digitalization, robotization, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, etc. And to make people understand that this will shift probably society more than what we see in the shift of world politics today. And this is what legislators need to understand. I would fall on the side of the argument saying that legislators, or we must find common ethical rules for the fourth industrial revolution before it's too late. And unfortunately, legislators are very slow on this.
Thank you. Just picking up on what Alex said about compensation for, as he put it, this shit. It's not worth it. Let me tell you, our project, Thinking the Unthinkable, going for 3 years now, says that many leaders are scared, don't like what they're doing, and would love to get out. So this becomes an existential challenge, particularly for your generation, which is why this question for this session is so important. Is the new generation ready to lead? How are you going to lead? And that's why we're now moving on to the startups and those of the next generation who are making business. But this is the context in which you've got to make business. You may think you're successful doing what you're doing, but the geopolitical environment is changing dramatically fast, and therefore within the next 50 minutes we'd like to get to the point of understanding how you can lead for your companies and how well they're doing, but within this context that both Anders and Alex have created for us. So those are your instructions, your marching instructions. Now, Ella, 3 to 4 minutes from you, please, on your company and how you see things.
50 years, my fund, what I'm currently focused on, and hopefully what I will be focused on another 47 years, is actually named after Winston Churchill's essay called 50 Years Hence that he published in 1931. And in that essay, he predicts artificial intelligence, wireless communication, and he talks about the absurdity of growing meat on live sentient animals. He talks that we should be growing them in a lab under suitable medium. He talks about genetically modifying organisms before we even understood what that means, and before we even understood genetics properly. He talks about all the things that we pretty much only see now, and I've been personally making investments in. And he talks about the brave new world that can come. And in the second part of that essay, and I recommend that you all look into it. It's called 50 Years Hence. He talks about the social responsibility of leaders and people who have access to guiding the technological progress to take a principled approach to what we're doing. So this is pretty much the genesis of 50 years. It was based on my 10 years experience, and not just mine, also my partners in tech. My partner actually worked for President Obama on his 2008 campaign, and has started a technology company. So we had this idea that, you know, the times are changing, and when you are in Silicon Valley, you actually quickly, the first time I moved there for this program called Y Combinator in 2012, I was a bit disillusioned with how people think of innovation. It was all about, you know, growth and money, and essentially it wasn't principled at all. And I thought it was such a waste of opportunity, especially when we have you know, the exponential curves and the population growth and everything else in terms of resource use and in terms of pretty much all the impacts that humanity has in the world. It's also growing exponentially. And we have solutions that have not been working, you know, 5, 10, 20 years ago already. And then we have that exponential growth curve on the population side. So of course, we're not going to solve those problems in time, you know, to make sure the climate change is not affecting us in a dramatic way. To make sure we don't have a massive amount of displaced, digitally excluded population, and all those other problems that you're probably aware of. And that's why we started investing in companies that are using the power of technology entrepreneurship and commercializing often scientific research and so-called hard tech to try to help them sort of give our experience running companies and give them financial resources to scale those companies to help offset those effects that I've been talking about. So and I actually really enjoyed both Anders and former prime minister's comments, and it's really great that you have such a deep understanding really of what is going on. So I mean, maybe before I address that, I'll actually give you a little bit of an overview what we've been looking at. So we've been investing in cellular agriculture, so trying to offset the environmental and other issues with animal agriculture. We've been looking into diagnostic devices and some of the nanotechnologies and some of the neural technologies that former Prime Minister has been talking about in cheap and ecological building technologies and self-driving to actually mostly teleoperated trucks and other transportation methods. So like things we really need to push the achievement of the sustainable development goals. Like we're not going to get there just by political consensus. And just to end up, just to make sure I don't take too much time right now, I really love the dates you brought up, that there was, and you know, being Polish, 1945 means a lot for Poland and 1989 means a lot for Poland. There's another date that I think is important. It's 1970. When Milton Friedman published his famous essay in the New York Times. And this is when essentially the current version of capitalism, because there were many iterations before, kind of become the mainstream version of capitalism. And he specifically, I might be misquoting a little bit, but he says that anyone who is focusing on providing employment, having, you know, fixing anything in the world by running business is an unwitting puppet of essentially the communists. So it created this weird claustrophobia. I think the Cold War really contributed to this like weird, you know, this is bad, communism is bad, so we're going to do everything, like we're going to go like all in on this opposite side, and this is, I believe, why the Friedman Doctrine won. But the good news, I think, and it goes to more leadership and business, that the Friedman Doctrine has been, I think, failing, and I think Trump's election is like the last, you know, like it was possible that Bernie Sanders won the first, you know, it wasn't impossible, maybe I should restate it, the first mainstream politician in the United States who called himself a socialist. So I think Trump was already and is a sort of a symptom of what has happened with the U.S. society of, you know, in the last 20 or 30 years. And there's been many problems, and I think I'm hoping, and hopefully this is not just, I'm hoping this is the case. So there's okay, I'm being cut off.
No, you haven't. I just said, could you come to an end? Okay, final point. And I'm happy to talk about all those impacts of all the technologies. Another date, the third date that you mentioned, 2016. I think it's important for the reason you mentioned, and it's extremely important and extremely symptomatic for what has been happening with the world. But also, Lee Sedol was beat by Google's DeepMind's AlphaGo, artificial intelligence, essentially, program. And it marks an end of an era. We did not think it would have happened so fast. Even for him, a few months before that, he was sure he's going to win. And even the researchers at AlphaGo, the Google's DeepMind division, they were not as confident that he's going to win. And since then, you know, computers beat humans in Texas Hold'em in a specific setup, which is, you know, arguably a game that. So I think we're going to see interesting 1 or 2 decades. All right, thanks. Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you. And you mentioned Friedman's book, Travis, picking up on your point about the limits to growth. Of course, that's what the Club of Rome wrote in 1972. And it's interesting, I was at a Vatican conference recently where a lot of people were talking about that, as if this is now something which is looming on the horizon as something which could be a measure of where we're heading for. Let me pick up now, Kasper.
Thank you. First of all, can I ask, are there any EU residents here?
Oh,
thank you.
Oh, EU residents.
Why we don't have many EU residents here, perhaps, is that your life doesn't suck as much as some of the EU residents does. Today, most EU residents come from emerging markets, EU residents of Estonia, like markets where you don't have access to capital, access to financial services, to business environments. And And what we do is that we opened our nation borders to them, and we invited them to become our digital citizens. You can't move physically to the country, but you can start becoming our digital membership and start using our services and everything else digitally. And we have people from emerging markets in Southeast Asia, like at the moment speaking the Asia topic, like especially coming, joining our e-residency. And what they do is today they mostly do business. They establish corporation, they access banking, open bank accounts, they access payables, payment providers, access different capital sources, and they run their businesses globally. And today they can't do that. World Bank estimates that 73% of today's citizens internationally can't have access to financial services, global financial services. And that's a huge problem. Like, you can have internet, but it's useless if you can't do anything with that. So, and this is what we try to solve, and it's going great. People are joining, and they are doing global business through our nation without ever even visiting EU. And coming back to the topic of Prime Minister asking if Trump and who will replace the US, like what I believe, and we see more and more, and there won't be like one huge region or one country who will replace everything. Like, each country becomes best at something, like startups do. Like, we really need to concentrate on what we do. We build our minimum viable product, and we go and we sell that, and we get very good at that, and then we attract globally market. There are 2 billion Facebook users, I guess, today, and the same will happen with nation states. Like, it's just too costly for us to serve everybody in that small regions what we have on all the services what we have in a cost-efficient way, because the world is getting more complex. So we need to start outsourcing more and more. We today outsource. NATO is outsourced privacy for us, like 2% GDP. We outsource our security physically. We start outsourcing more and more things, and each nation becomes good at something, and we need to choose. And today we already are. Like, Finland is known for keeping the Nordic religion, Nordic values. You know, Vatican is known for being the religious hub of the world. You know, at least the US used to be the known or protecting democracy values and stuff. So we each find our ways where we are best at. And then we don't serve that to those little regions what we own in this planet, because it's waste of money and resource. We start serving that to globally everybody, and this is what we do at Estonia. And we chose today that we want to be best at the moment in business environment, and now we have tens of thousands of international e-residents who take advantage of that. We are offering the platform. I believe once there won't be like tens of thousands, there are hundreds of thousands, millions, and then billions. And each country attracts billions of users for their services. Other nations can offer healthcare for international. Other can offer physical movement. You know, we can't offer themselves everything. So, and that's why I see that in different nations, there are random nations like Estonia who becomes good at something, scales that up, and offers that to everybody. And that's like enough income for one nation. And it's very hard to predict which nations those are. If I would need to do predictions, I would say that those nations who are really emerging can do it easier than those in Western world, especially if you can start from scratch. And we have many people, nations at the moment, who are in rapid development in technology, doing all the blockchain hashtag things from scratch, and we can see that it's so much more efficient. And in years to come, I believe, they will replace many services what today bigger nations and wealthier nations offer, even to their own citizens. And so, yeah, this is what we try to do. And I'm happy that I'm very happy that Finland, and especially credits to Prime Minister Stubb, ex-Prime Minister Stubb, who I remember I watched your Slush talk. I think it was like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when on the stage you announced that let's follow that path, and we were speaking about the infrastructure, digital infrastructure in Estonia. It's called X-Road, and let's follow and do that the same way. And just last month it was announced the first collaboration between Estonia and Finland to have interchangeable digital infrastructure. We can like cross-border change data and everything. And this is a huge step. I believe like after a few years there will be tens and other nations who will join that, and we can lead that digital conversation, at least in this region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to come in at this stage?
Can I just say something
Please.
very quickly?
Yeah.
I know I should.
Yeah.
Actually, my partner is 50 years. I think he has like the ID number like 1,000. He's
Oh, really?
He's like, this is amazing. We need more of that. And
Well done.
He's a Estonia resident.
And of course, from Saturday, you take over the European Union presidency.
Sure.
Yeah, which is about leadership as well. I'm going to keep driving you. We've got 45 minutes to run. What does the new generation want? What are your frustrations? What else do you want to put on the agenda? So, April, can I come to you? And I want your remarks to be underpinned by that question. What does the new generation want?
Sure. Thank you. And I tried to keep my introduction brief. Let me share a couple more data points to round things out. First, I am half Finnish. So really happy to be here. My father was 100%. Happy 100th. I'm just delighted. Second, I am an Estonian resident, as is my husband. We were among the first cohort back in 2014, so we go way back. Third, I was born and raised in San Francisco. Keep one foot there, the other foot traveling around the world. The San Francisco I live in today is very different than the San Francisco in the Silicon Valley that I grew up in, and recently have deliberately chosen to leave because of some of the tensions and inequalities that we see. So company innovation does not mean policy innovation. What's coming out of Silicon Valley, you can arguably say it's the best of humanity, you can arguably say it's the worst of humanity if there's not a moral responsibility to take accountability for some of the effects that new technologies have. And finally, although I am based in the US, I work globally. I work in an average of 20 to 25 countries a year. I just returned from a business trip that included Mexico, Argentina, South Korea, South Africa, Thailand, the UK, and Spain. That was last month. So I have a really good sense, like what's happening around the world as we look at these new business models, which is where I want to focus my comments, as well as what the new generation wants. So thank you both, thank everybody for marking us in history. I want to pose my comments in the context of the last roughly 250 years of the Industrial Revolution, where we've built economies worldwide based on production, consumption, ownership, and employment. Each and every one of those four tenets, if you will, is being challenged, to put it lightly, by this thing, and more broadly, technologies that allow us to connect with more people and find more things and meet our needs and our families' needs more easily and more cheaply than ever before. And so, as I mentioned, I work in this space broadly of the sharing economy, access over ownership, if you've heard of that, car sharing, ride sharing, home sharing, co-working spaces, clothes sharing, meal sharing. The list goes on and on. It literally touches every aspect of our daily lives. Now, I could jump ahead and say, what does the new generation want? It wants access. It doesn't want the responsibility and the liability of ownership. I would also challenge each of us to think about the fact that if you imagine a world in which you share or access, rather than own, some of the things that you need, you have economic benefits, you can save money, you can earn income in new ways, and I'll get to that in a moment. You use natural resources more efficiently. You generally, if done well, build community, and you increase convenience, access, choice, that sort of thing. So you have economic benefits, environmental benefits, social benefits, and practical benefits all packed into one business model. That is an incredibly compelling proposition. I would argue the new generation wants very much that kind of thing because we're looking at unprecedented levels of debt. We're looking at real constraints in the labor markets. That's my other point in just a moment. This is something that the new generation wants and new generation is ready to lead. I would argue this actually is really, really helpful for everybody. If you're elderly, if you're a mid-career professional, if you're youth, you name it, but we're still stuck in this mindset that comes from 250 years of assuming that linear growth, production, consumption, ownership, employment is the model that is going to work and that we're going to continue doing these things this way because it's how we've always done them. The new generation is saying, no, that's absolutely not the case, and excuse us while we actually go create a different way of connecting through this. And to your point, when we've got a new generation of digital natives growing up that don't know anything else, when I'm having those days when I just wonder whether policymakers will ever really get on board and that sort of thing, I hate to sound so blunt, but we do have some demographics playing out. And within a generation, the majority of people alive in the world will not know a world in which they couldn't find everything they need through this. So right there, ready or not, the world is changing, the new generation will be leading, and we will be meeting our needs in different ways. Two very brief points. I know I don't have time now. I'm happy to dive in conversation. I just want to underscore the way two cases in which this new reality, if you will, plays out. One is cities and urbanization, and the second is the future of work. So urbanization will be one of the key phenomena that defines the 21st century. We have roughly 7.3 billion people in the world today. 55% of us live in cities. For the first time in human history, back in 2007, we passed, more than 50% living in cities. I will spare you the details of what happens in the coming decades, but let's say by 2100, we're going to, assuming all goes as planned, 2100, we have 10 billion people, 85% of them live in cities. We have more than 1 billion people more in cities than we have in the whole world today. We have to rethink business models that adapt for urban living, and this is where I say the sharing economy fits really well. We can't keep cramming more people and things into cities. We have to think about how do we access and use resources massively more efficiently than we do today. And secondly, the future of work. Again, really don't have time for this, but already today, if you're not aware, somewhere between 20 and 35% of the labor markets in the US and Europe are freelance. They're independent workers. They're not employees. That number is expected to rise to over 50% by 2030. Again, enabled by the fact that many people can earn income through new ways, through their smartphones. That change is going to have massive implications on social safety nets, on education, on workplace, obviously talent retention, retention, performance, all sorts of things, as well as income generation. There's talk now, you probably have heard about universal basic income, other ways that we rethink social safety nets because the social contract is shredding, but also employment. A lot of people are proactively opting out of employment because they've realized they would much prefer the independence and flexibility that independent work provide, but also, of course, we have automation, which is going to be eliminating a lot of jobs that many people have relied on thus far. And I'm over time, apologies, but those are some thoughts on what people want and also the trends that are approaching us, whether or not we want them. Thank you.
April, don't apologize. These are really profound issues, which I want to come to Anders and Alex very quickly. Those critical issues, the assumptions of linear growth, the assumptions of the future of jobs and work, the social contract shredding, are those in the political class who've got to manage this with the election cycle prepared to confront the enormity of this? Anders?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, if we've changed the linear model, we've gone to an exponential model. So when we scale out things today, when you have the compounded effect of 7 or 8% growth, that's completely different from what we've seen. It doesn't mean that growth slows down. It actually means that growth accelerates. That's how we can get all of this disruption. So I agree on that point. I think for Europe and the US, this calls for a fundamental reform of our way of dealing with the welfare state. Not in terms of basic income models, but rather to have a lifelong work life. The idea of us entering the labor force at 25 and leaving it at 65, I think, is gone. We are going to work much longer, but we're also going to spend much more time interacting with education during our life.
And so, Alex, is this a really profound challenge for those who are expected to lead, even if being a leader is shit, as you put it? I mean, this is adding to the shit.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, one of the best ways I've heard the fourth industrial revolution explained was actually by Anne-Marie Slaughter from the US. And she said, well, you know, if you think that the first industrial revolution was big, and it's brought with it, remember, Marxism. Take that 100 times, and then you're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. I think it's going to revolutionize everything. The way in which we work, the way in which we live, ethics, and all I need to do, and you know, this is about the next generation. I've written a little bit about reversed mentorship. You know, my best teachers are at home, and you know, Emily's 15 and Oliver is 13. I see the mega trends that they're dealing with, and the way in which they deal with modern communication and technology, and I'm really trying to work hard to keep up, and I'm struggling with that. So that's why I was saying in the beginning that is this generation that is in many ways already leading, and good for it. But I think politics is going to be revolutionary.
Extraordinary how reverse mentoring, everyone nods, but they don't want it to happen inside their company or inside their civil service, because those at the top feel vulnerable. Now look, I'm going to keep pressing you. What do you all want? How does this get managed? How do you find a place? Do you just make your way doing startups? Some of them fail, some of them do well. How do you manage this? And what is the message we take away at 10 to 3 for those who will be sitting in here at 5 o'clock? And some of you will be here with the next generation of corporate leaders. Because are they getting the message? What message do you want us to take away from this to them? Because I can transmit it, and some of you can, please. I'm going to go to the other two in a moment, but just quickly come in at this point.
Yeah, Lauri Talvas from OP Financial, which is actually a rather big local company, but it's transforming and trying to be agile. I would like to bring in the point that now quite a few people have brought up that the future is in the kind of young people. We have like 1 billion people in China. The middle class of China are born digital natives. They didn't have the same kind of weight of bad infrastructure as we do have in the Western world. So if we really want to see where the digital world is going, we should already spend more focus in what is happening with the digital tools that the Chinese working people are actually doing. It's already here today. We don't need to kind of wait 15 years for our children or our forefathers' children to grow and show what the world will be. And bringing from this, we really need to have the existing, our people who are in power at the moment. They need to be willing to change the existing structures of the society. We have, for instance, really bad IP laws that force us into do really weird competition things, while our nice rivals from the Asia don't need to follow. They are able to compete more efficiently. They're able to run faster, and we would need to have that kind of support, that we are able to run fast, that we are able to do the development that is needed to remain competitive in this new era.
Thank you very much indeed. So the issue is how all of you are going to lead through this, and I see there are tweets already about that question. How will they lead in this new environment? So please, Ushka, can you let that question underpin your thoughts as well at this stage?
Yeah, so I think for me as a co-founder of a hardware startup in healthcare sector, I think it's often a luxury to even think about what I want or how I think or how I would like things to be, because usually my everyday is just trying to battle through the reality of trying to create a company and employ people and have them prosper and have them be happy, while also making consumers happy, while also making innovation and progress in technology. So it's quite complicated as it is. But maybe I should start with how we started with BellaBeat. We actually started 4 years ago, and we were trying to develop a remote patient monitoring system for pregnant women as a part of public healthcare in Slovenia, where I'm originally from. And this was actually this is the most interesting part when people actually ask me why I started a business. I never actually wanted to start a business. This was just trying to build a project that might make a difference in something that my generation, I think, where we come from, trying to fix something that my generation, where I come from, sees as a very valuable thing, and that is free or very accessible healthcare and education. But then unfortunately, the reality of how things actually work hit us. So we weren't able to develop that home monitoring system and had to transfer into consumer technology, because the reality is we had to produce money to be able to produce innovation. So this is how we actually started to get into business and make money and employ people. But even in my like short lifetime of 28 years, I've kind of experienced and felt a lot of change within Europe. So I was born in then failing Yugoslavia, and then grew up in Slovenia that was kind of transferring from that communistic period into turbo capitalism, because of course we want to do everything that kind of reflects what the West is doing, even though it might not be the best solution. So I think at that point, when we started a business, we were fully aware that we are beneficiaries of the kind of like the systems that were put in place in Europe at that time, so education and healthcare, and we're in a position to try to fix things, but then the reality kind of ran us over, and we had to do things differently. So a lot of young people are aware of what is good in Europe and what should be fixed, but then how things can be done is totally different for them. So they're trying to swim in this water of trying to stay afloat while changing the things. So this is kind of like the reflection on the moral side of what a lot of entrepreneurs are doing stuff. And then I could relate a lot to the comment on the Asia, how everything is transferring to Asia, because like I said before, I'm based between Europe and China, and a lot of the people, when I tell them that we manufacture things in China and then I partially live there, ask me if that is because China is cheap to produce, and it's not. It's not actually cheap to manufacture in China anymore, but it's the only place where they've built infrastructure that allows us to access technology that we need to build fast and efficiently. So I think everybody was showing the, I don't know, the cell phone as access to, or the tool of globalization. And then also one underlying theme of this conference is like the AI, but both, so AI is actually powered by the phone and other sensors, which are hardware. And this is where China is winning. They've built infrastructure that allows hardware to be built fast and efficiently. And this is where the Western world or the US is kind of losing to them. This is where the Silicon Valley is losing to China. But then I think we also forget in Europe that Silicon Valley could also be losing to us, because to Europe, because of the thing that I've mentioned previously, and that is the accessible education. So actually our biggest office is based in Zagreb, Croatia, and there are huge parts like Zagreb, Croatia, or Slovenia. Within Europe, where there's a lot of untapped talent that have been, developing and growing now for decades, and it's not being used properly because there are not a lot of opportunities in many parts of Europe. So this is where Silicon Valley's kind of the second weakest point is. They've built a great community there. They've built a couple of very strong institutions, but everything got really expensive and really hard to manage. And this is where a lot of European companies kind of stepped in and used what we have here. So I think for Europe, the situation is not that bad. It just needs some adjustment, and I think a lot of young leaders like us are realizing that, and kind of like are managing the situation but without a lot of ego and a lot of ability to adapt and willingness to adapt.
Thanks, Urška. Where do you think the new Silicon Valley is? Is it in China?
I think
is it going to be in Europe?
Yeah, I think in regards of there's becoming a big division between software and hardware, I think. And China is right now winning in hardware. They're taking over some software as well, but Europe can step up in software.
All right. I'm going to keep pressing. We've got 20 minutes to run, and I'm going to come back to each of you. What does your generation want? I'm going to come to each of you in a moment. Rajib,
Yep, thank you. So in keeping the theme of some of my previous speakers of starting with a date, I thought I'd start with one in the future, so 2025, not too many years away, but it's said that over 50% of today's jobs will no longer exist by that time. We've heard, obviously, about the rise of self-driving cars and automation, but I believe it was going to affect every single one of us sitting in the room today and the work that we currently do. So what does that mean for us? It means we need to focus our attention on education, education for the next generation, but also education of the existing generation. And the question was a very great question at the back around, the role of lifelong learning. So if we think about the next generation, Anders made the point that the young people are probably the most educated than they have been in the past. And whilst I do agree, I would question whether they're being educated in the right things that we actually need for the future. So yes, technical education has come along a long way, and now you are seeing coding in the curriculum, but are we equipping young people with the soft skills that they really need? So around resilience and around kind of risk-taking, the ability to fail. And to do that, education systems need to fundamentally change. And then when you move on to the existing generation, we fundamentally all need to make sure that we can continuously upskill and reskill ourselves. Manpower came out with a report recently called Learnability, saying that employers of the future are going to hire on the ability for people to learn quickly, because the only certainty is uncertainty. So you need to continuously reinvent yourselves to be able to keep up with the rapid change in the world of work. And the second point I wanted to make is around the nature of work itself and the kind of structures and hierarchy. So April mentioned the rise of the gig economy, so people moving more towards a freelance model and shunning the more conventional, permanent, kind of salaried approach to having a job. And that's certainly a big mega trend that I think we're going to continue to see. But the other one is also challenging the traditional hierarchies in the workplace. So the question here was made about some of these big companies here and what can they do to adapt to the next generation. Well, what we're seeing, particularly in the world of startups, is a drive towards a more flat structure, a more open and transparent model. There are companies like Buffer in the US where they have remote workforce, completely remote company. They have all of the salaries being totally transparent, so you know what everyone is earning in the company, a very open kind of model to calculate how that comes about. These kind of attitudes amongst millennials and the next generation to a more transparent, flat kind of structure are something which can potentially scare a lot of people, particularly people running big corporations, but they are things that we're going to have to address if you're thinking about attracting kind of future generations and the millennial workforce. And the third point I would make really talks to the point that I suppose Alex made around using enterprise and the shunning, I suppose, politics. And I think that's partly linked to my previous point around structure. So I believe that the next generation doesn't engage with the party political model. I believe they think that it's quite bureaucratic and it takes time to get things done. And so they turn towards kind of enterprise and entrepreneurship, and they can, and actually social enterprise. So the question about morals came up over there. We're seeing a significant rise in people using entrepreneurship to change the world for the better. And so it may be that they're not engaging in the more traditional political model, but it does mean that we need to question what does the next generation of politics really look like? Because it doesn't mean that the next generation is apathetic. Far from it. They're actually very engaged with issues, but they're probably more engaged on single specific issues than towing the party line and just agreeing with a certain to say whatever that party believes that they should do. So I would say that those are kind of three things, obviously with a focus on the future of work, that as leaders of existing big companies that we need to bear in mind, as well as some of the attitudes that we're seeing coming through from the next generation.
Thanks very much. That really does put the cat among the pigeons, particularly on the issue of leadership, I think, as well, and also on skills and learn. I heard the Minister for Infrastructure and Transportation tell a shipping conference about 4 weeks ago. He said, you're going to be dead in the water, literally, if you don't learn and understand. You've got to relearn and reskill at your own expense, because no one's going to do it for you. So now, very quickly, a minute each, because I'm going to keep pressing you. What does the new generation want? Get more from them, please. Imagine that they're looking at my shoes, not their shoes.
I would totally agree that this, with your diagnosis of what the generation wants, which is the millennials want it all, and I don't like that phrase, and I don't like the word millennials, but that's true. I think there's been, like this generation, whatever sort of noun you use for it, they understand the power of technology. They often worked in some nonprofits and in some different not governmental organizations maybe, and they see the problems associated with it, and then they see this amazing tool for kind of driving change in the world, for good and for bad, that is business. And there was a study done by Deloitte, and I think I tracked back to 2015. And in 2015, they asked the MBA, so like in the US, so the most money-grabbing sort of subset of the population entering the new workforce, and they asked them, would you take a significant salary cut to work for a company that produces some essentially positive social and environmental externalities? And in 2015, maybe 14, I believe around 20% said yes, we would take a significant pay cut. In 2015, that number was, I believe, 43%. And in 2016, it was 83%. I think people are realizing that, you know, we're running out of other tools. So maybe you will learn in 20 years that we need to look for even more tools. But it seems like a really decent bet to be trying to do it this way. And then even after the unfortunate Brexit and Trump's election in Silicon Valley, you actually saw many people in the position of power and technology realizing like, oh, like we actually have to step up. So you have Reid Hoffman, you have Zuckerberg, you have all those leaders of who have previously not been very politically engaged for good and for bad. They're trying to, I think, really reassess what their impact should be. I know of many informal meetings that are being held, and you know, you might criticize them for. It's easy to criticize people who are on the spot. Yeah,
right.
But
good.
It's happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
In other words, the calibration has got to change. That's what you're saying based on that Deloitte report. The calibration of what people want is going to be very different, and it's changing very fast.
We're able to quantify environmental and social externalities very well, and I think that leads to reassessment of what capitalism is and what business's role in society is.
Casper and April.
I want to echo the salary part. This is very fun. My team members are from Mexico, US, UK, Ukraine, France, many different countries, you know. And the last 3 persons who joined my team took 85 to 95% salary cut. Imagine getting 10 times less salary and doing some work. So this is like pretty amazing. Like what
do you read into that though, Casper? What does that tell us about what the next
two things want? What they say mostly when they join, because they're mostly very young people also. First is that they join because it matters what we do. So that doesn't need more explanation. And second is empowering. Like this is for self-esteem, most probably, like the feeling to empower citizens or anyone is so powerful and so cool. And through technology, we can empower every day by offering free seat on the bus, being nice to people, we can empower. But through technology, we can empower millions within each day, and that feeling is great, and that's why they are coming to empower, to do something which matters. And sometimes and the reason, my third point is that even if you want to pay more, then sometimes you can see that if you have more salary than you need, then you don't invest that money, then you just work less. You work as much as needed.
So for the message going forward, the measure of success and achievement will be very different.
True.
April.
Great, thank you. And I won't repeat, actually, I very much agree with both of you around that sense of purpose and meaning, but I want to add a bit more to the mix. So I think we have to be really clear when we say, what does the next generation want? Who are we talking about? Are we talking about the next generation in Finland and Estonia, and more broadly the European Union, or are we talking about the next generation in China, in India, in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Brazil? Very different. I would say across the board, people want, the new generation, if I may say, wants a sense of belonging. And the reason we've seen the rise of nationalism is because people have lost a sense of belonging, a sense of being connected to something bigger that actually cares for them. They also want fewer burdens, but I would say, in the case of a developing world, they want a lesser burden of poverty. They want actually to own things for the first time. They want a job because they've never actually had access to a traditional job market. That's not to say they're going to get one, but they want fewer burdens around poverty and the reality that they've had for a long time. In more developed countries, I would say the new generation wants fewer burdens in the form of lower debt, more freedom, more flexibility, and ability to take. It's a real gift to be able to take a 90% pay cut. Not everyone in the world is able to do that. So I think what I want to tease out here is there are some fundamentals around what the new generation wants, but we have to be really careful. Whose shoes are we standing in? Are we talking about somebody who's in the emerging middle class? Are we talking about somebody who comes from an educated family or not? Are we talking about somebody who comes from a rural place versus urban, et cetera, et cetera? So not to muddy the waters, but I think it's really important because there's not just one answer.
Ushka, do you want to add anything to what you said earlier?
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said so far, and I think maybe just add that I see a lot of everywhere new generation wants. I think more opportunities and less division. Like you said, like what does new generation in the US want, or Europe or China? Maybe we should. I mean, this is the point of all tech advancement and globalization, that we unify that and see what roles we can take within this whole community.
Nothing further to add.
Alrighty, who wants to come in? Anders, yeah, come in quickly. And who else? Because you've got 15 minutes to change the world. I'll come to you right at the back, please. 33 will be next. Anders.
Well, I think there is a big risk when we start out the discussion on technology to get too optimistic. I think we should realize that for a young generation in Asia and Africa, they go into the labor market with 15 to 20% higher income than the father and mother. So they really see progress. The whole crux of the issue for the US and Europe is that we don't have progress anymore. We are back at the productivity growth that is pre-industrial revolution. If you have 0.5% in average productivity, in 20 years you will add 10% in welfare. If you have 2.5%, as we did before the crisis, you will add 50%. And that's a major part why we have a lot of political tensions coming. We cannot deliver anymore a continuous improvement of welfare in Europe and US. And if we believe that the US model of capitalism is defunct, I mean, I've spent 8 years reforming European welfare state. If something is defunct, it is the European welfare state, and it will be even under more pressure going forward. A, because of the demographics, and B, because our tax bases are eroded by technology. Everything becomes more flexible, and if you have a more flexible labor market, well, that actually means that you can't tax labor anymore. That means that the biggest tax base we have become much more vulnerable. So I think we have to take on board that disruption in technology is sounding very optimistic, but the prerequisite of Europe and the US is low productivity growth, low income growth, more job disruption, and also a defunct European welfare model. So it's actually not that the next 2 or 3 decades are going to be that fantastic for Europe and the US. And it might sound very optimistic when we stick to the technology stuff, but in reality, these are a harsh couple of decades.
But picking up what April said, the end of the linear assumptions of growth moving upwards at a steady rate.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that our societal models are under severe stress.
Good. Oh, all right. Thank you, I should say, rather. Please, 24.
Hi, my name is Tina Antturi and I represent NGO World. I work for World Vision. And thank you, April, for taking up this urbanization, and also Rajiv for the education. But when we talk about what does the new generation want, I would like to bring in the aspect of lost generation in here, because what Anders said is that we are going to have more global crises and conflicts, which means that we will going to have more displaced people. We're going to have more people and more young people out from school. Only in Syria right now we have 6.5 million dislocated people, and for 3 million, more than 3 million children out from school.
So put in one sentence what the new generation wants.
Education, which is the key thing, and how can we solve that thing through, because they all have mobile phones, but they don't go to schools. So, that is also a big potential.
Education for specific skills.
To bring in the new leaders also from the third world.
Thank you. Table 16, please. And over there. You have to turn it on.
Okay.
Yep.
So my name is Otto Lavinen from North Bay, and I'm their creative director. And I want to thank all the panelists and all the other ones from the nice thoughts. I would like to add, to the Anders, it's a valid point about the disruption of work. And I think the big problem with startups, I also have my own small company. And from the company perspective, everything seems great. But when I look for the society as a whole, I'm looking at Facebook, Google, they don't actually employ that many people. And this is the challenge, the old model is based on taxing employees. So if there's less employment in this kind of disrupting companies, where does the kind of funds for the running the society come from?
Which is what Anders has just said.
Yeah.
The tax take is going down because of the new nature of work.
Can I ask, should we tax robots?
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I want to hear. Should we tax robots?
No, it's just silly.
But I was asking the next generation.
No, but I mean, if you tax the capital stock, you will definitely have less welfare going forward. The stupidest thing you can do is to tax something that is super mobile, and it's pretty clear that robots are more mobile than people. So it's probably the most stupid idea we've heard in combination with basic income of the last decade.
Do you say it's stupid or impractical?
It's a bizarre idea. We know from very basic economic research that you can't tax the capital stock without destroying productivity, without destroying real wage growth. So it's counterproductive in terms of restoring real wage growth.
All right. I'm going to keep pressing you.
But what if there are no wages and we don't need the growth in productivity? Like, what if the trends that April has been talking about are actually happening, and there is actually, I actually disagree with you on the future of labor. I think there will be less employment. So if I agree with you that if you're thinking that there's going to be the same amount of jobs, that's the right, then yes, this is a silly idea. But I actually am sure there's going to be less labor.
But it is a very silly idea, because the negative impact of a tax is in direct proportion to how flexible the tax base is. And capital is the most flexible one. So if you have the taxes, you won't get the real wage increases.
But again, not if you're thinking that wages might not exist 100 years from now. And I will...
Keep going.
In terms of what is going to happen with the labor markets in the next 100 years, I think we're going to, as a society, agree to some sort of new ways of making sure people feel good about themselves and people feel productive, so we don't have an amazing massive epidemic of social problems caused by people feeling irrelevant. But I don't think there's going to be that much justification for people who keep retraining themselves. It's just so hard to follow, to really follow the changes that are happening already. I don't think we just physiologically have the brain capacity to be following those curves that we're going to see in 100 years.
Should the circular economy be taxed, and if so, how can it be taxed?
It has to be taxed.
Probably, yes.
An algorithm will fix that.
But I'm sure April has an answer.
April?
Can't say I have an answer. I have some ideas.
An option.
And sure. So I think we need to be radically more creative about how we tax. And when I hear, should we tax robots, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, sure. And the other is like, I don't know how that would work. Are we looking at robots as products and we're going to tax them as they are produced? That's not rocket science to figure out. Where's the robot made? How do you do it? Or are we going to tax the robot as labor, as providing a service, so that you would tax, a transaction or an activity that a person would have done in the past, a robot performs that you tax per transaction. That's not rocket science to figure out either. I'm not sure that either of those is perfect, but some aspect of companies that are actively having a material effect on the job market, on labor, on wages, etc., I do believe have an economic, a social, and one could say a moral obligation to play some role in the social safety net. So I work with companies like Airbnb, if you've heard of them, right? Airbnb, contributing massive amounts to local economic development. Not a single host is an employee. No one would ever claim that they would be. Yet, we're looking at this massive, like very few people earn full-time income on a platform like that, but look at the gig economy more broadly. None of the people working in the gig economy are employees. So they don't have access to traditional benefits, disability, healthcare in the US, healthcare in many other countries they would get, but paid time off, workers' compensation, that sort of thing. Imagine a scenario in which platforms paid a pro rata percentage to a provident fund, some sort of collective benefits vehicle that allowed gig economy workers to tap into. So we're not asking any company to take full responsibility, but we're asking some acknowledgement that the labor force is changing, the business model is changing. This is incredibly helpful for workers, but we need to rethink that. Now, what I've just described, pro rata contribution, there's nothing particularly novel about that. We have the technology, we have the wherewithal. We could do it if there were the political will to actually implement that kind of policy reform. That's just one idea, added to taxing robots and all the rest. But I want to call out, we need to be so much more creative and break down the mental barriers we have on it's just not going to work because it hasn't worked before, because we haven't done it this way before.
All right, well, there's a lot of ideas coming out, but when you hear someone who's quite happy to take a 90% pay cut, what are the implications there for tax take? Former Prime Minister, former Finance Minister, what do you do when the nature of work and what people are prepared to earn is immediately having a dramatic impact, likely impact, quite apart from robots, on the ability to tax and therefore to have revenue for government and governance? Anders?
I mean, I think this was very close to nonsensical. To be
but is there a generational gap
This
here?
is great.
It is. It has nothing to do with it.
Is it what the old generation defends and the new generation wants?
It's just fundamental microeconomics. What we need to do is to move to the e-mobile tax bases, meaning property and consumption. That's what you need to do. Labor and capital are the ones that are flexible and basically also the ones that are eroded by globalization and increased competition. It's pretty clear that the circular economy is a big tax fraud if you see it as a kind of from a Swedish perspective, because you migrate out, if you swap things with each other, you migrate out of the tax system, and that's quite problematic. It's a big risk of an increased black economy.
But you're not saying that someone who wants to take a 90% pay cut is engaged in tax fraud. He or she is taking a lifestyle decision and a decision about the way they want to run their life.
No, but that's a completely different thing. That's a welfare choice that you're allowed to do. But I mean, we can't change the fundamental logic of microeconomics. We harm the economy the more we tax people that stuff that are flexible, and therefore we need to rebalance our tax system towards property, consumption, stuff that are not as flexible.
Yep. I mean, yeah. Just two very quick answers. The first one was when I was finance minister, there was nothing that I had in my political life got more feedback from than taxes. Anything that you do, one little thing that you tweak out of the 500 and plus tax resources that we have, you will get someone shouting and screaming and coming with tremendous arguments either for and against. So this is probably, whether macro or micro, an issue that we'll be dealing with forever. I think the big issue here, and this is my point number 2, where I actually agree with April, is about what will human beings be left with at the end of the day if we are basically emancipated from labor in a traditional sense, physical, sometimes perhaps even partially mental. If we do not have to work from 9 to 5, if we do not have to work with shifts, if we don't have to work from a certain place in the future, what will be left? And if, say, all the difficult things that our mind cannot deal with are done by artificial intelligence, and all the mundane thing that we can do physically will not be able to be done by AI, what is left? And there, I think there's only one thing, and that's the fundamental thing about human beings, and that's empathy and connection between other human beings. That's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Whether we'll be able to manage the transition period to that, that's a completely different question.
Should we tax empathy?
No, we should not tax empathy.
Casper?
I so agree with you, and I think the creativity, like, it's not future. We can already see that with the 90% cut, it shows people are becoming more creative, more trying to help others, and it's there. We can just now, through technology, make it massively everywhere happen. And very cool thing is that this is not like future talk what they're doing now. Like, just last week, we had very serious discussion in our government, like, if we have 10 million EU residents, why do we need to tax them? And the decision was we don't need taxation as a revenue model for our government at all. We can have subscription-based models for our government. We can have different models. So the revenue model for governments already now starting to change, and that's why it's awesome time. And I like your optimistic view.
All right, right. Let's go. I got 3, 4. Please, you've had your hand up for a long time. Yeah, introduce yourself. We've got 15 minutes to run.
Hello. Okay. Hi, I'm Katie Gero from AmCham Finland. It's been really inspiring. I realise I have a lot to learn.
What do you want as the next new generation?
Well, actually, I have a question. Something that I recognise.
No, don't avoid my question.
But it's
good politician.
Yeah. But it's about positivity. I feel like the next generation is really lacking positivity, and there's a real sense that people are making decisions based out of fear. And I'm wondering where the responsibility is going to come from for making sure people are empowered wherever they are in the world to make decisions from a positive, confident place. Because I think in order to break these different thought patterns that need to change and go forward, people need a huge amount of support to do it.
So what do they want? What do they want?
I think that they need either some kind of security to feel positivity, or that's really the question. Like, how do you encourage that feeling? That's where I'm struggling.
All right, thank you. Please, yeah.
Anu Bradford from Columbia University. So our panel has portrayed a very fluid picture of the future work of the economic governance of business and individual choice making. So I'm curious as to how that translates into political decision making. So do we need more or less government in the future? And what is the optimal size or the unit of that governance? So there's a wonderful piece by Alessina, an Italian economist, who is based at Harvard, about the optimal size of the nation. So what is the optimal size of the nation for the new generation, given all the trends that we are learning about?
Thank you. What's the optimal size of a nation?
Very briefly, I actually, thank you, Anu. I'm going to argue that I actually think, I'm not sure there's one optimal size. I should joke, I'm a huge fan of what Estonia is doing. Just as a case study, with 1.2 million people, you can do a lot. That's roughly the size of the greater San Francisco area, so you've got a city. What I want to point out is I actually think that cities, municipalities, city leaders, mayors will be more powerful than many prime ministers in the future. So instead of saying the ideal size of a nation state, I'm going to say let's look much more at what's happening at more local levels. Let's look at cities as potential leaders. Many cities like Seoul, South Korea, or Mexico City, they're larger than most countries in the European Union. 20 million people, 30 million people. China alone has over 250 cities, over 1 million people. So it's not the full answer, but I would actually look at what can we do at the local level where mayors are accountable to the people they live next to, and how can we network mayors as much as possible with one another to be learning from those best practices, but implementing them at a much more hyper-local level. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm not sure. I think this is a question that should be left to specialists, but intuitive and then transformation to that is difficult because we live in the Westphalian system of nation states, which actually many young people disagree with completely. I mean, not disagree, I mean, objectively it exists, but it's definitely not the most efficient way of organizing people, and it's not fair way of organizing people if you believe in human rights. But yes, there's going to be more sort of local activity and trying to figure out what models work. There's going to be more experimentation. There are 25 maybe universal basic income pilots run in different countries. It might not work. There are pilots, there are studies being made there. One is actually happening in Oakland, I believe. And there is, I believe we will have a more lean approach to experimentation around things that work and things that doesn't. So it's very hard to get the political will at the national level. So this is why things, from what I understand, do not work. But
thank you.
Yes.
All right. I want to pick up what Rajiv was saying, talking about manpower and what you talk about their word learnability, about skills, about the needing to relearn as well, the need for transparency, the move towards completely remote working, and I'm quoting you here, flatter structures and so on, and also what does the next generation of politics look like? In the last 15 minutes, let me ask those who've taken the floor or want to take the floor, if you can help us understand what you think can work in that area.
Number 19 also.
Go ahead. I'm just putting that on the floor at the moment, so if you've got something else, please do.
Okay. Juha Mäntynen from Staria. It has been great stuff already, and I believe this evening will be even greater. So a couple thoughts, and then I try to summarize what I think the new generation want to hear next.
Can you summarize in 2 minutes?
I will. Okay. First of all the industries are already moving towards software industries. Software industry is moving towards robotization and automation, which means that all the industry will be automated more or less sooner or later. Another thing is that I believe in the future we are more willing to pay, and we are buying more services, usability, accessibility, design and ethics. Couple examples, like a 3D printing. You can print basically like a chairs or sofas or whatever. So first I can buy a bed to my kid. When it's growing bigger, I will put the bed to the shredder and print a bigger one. Then when he is moving away, I will print a cube with the wheels and put it to this home and print like a sofa. So in the future we are more using that kind of usability things and design and usability. Okay, so when we are now moving to new kind of paradigm shift, people are aware of how the world will look like in the future. And I believe that in core of management, change management is to way to present people how their world will look like in the future in practical level. Everybody knows that, okay, there will be robotic cars and automation, but how my work, for example, will change in practical level in the future. So I believe what next generation wants and current generations wants is to see more leadership and charismatic leaders to tell them how the world will look like and getting them to want the future.
What about if fewer people want to become leaders, as we've just heard from Alex? We're seeing that in many places. Certainly it's coming up in our research. Many of your generation don't want to go into companies, don't want to go into public service. And we heard Oettinger, the European Commissioner, yesterday saying that many people no longer want to go into the European Union because the conditions are getting worse.
Yes, it's possible that not so much in politics, but maybe entrepreneurs, like Elon Musk, or we have here many entrepreneurs that are showing example that, hey, there is a future, and there is a future that we want to go together.
Thank you. Right, please come back in.
Thank you.
Have we begun to answer your question about moral leadership?
No, this is linked. I think there's an important question as to what we mean by the next or new generation. So April made the great point that there's a geographic difference between what the next generation around the globe. But we talk a lot about the millennials, and there's a lot of reference to them. What about the 30-something like me in this room? Are we the deadbeat generation? Because there's not a lot of discussion about what this generation wants. And is it the fact that we're asking the question, is the next generation ready to lead? Isn't that just one way of saying we're not seeing the leadership yet? That's why we're asking the question. Because if it were so obvious that we were all leading politically, etc., we wouldn't have to ask it. And it's interesting that our esteemed panelists are economically driven today. We don't really have the deadbeat generation political leaders at the stage today. My husband's pointed out that obviously Macron is somebody who's 30-something, and he is taking the leadership role in France. But I think it's an important question as to why the 30-pluses aren't taking political leader roles. I'm going to say anecdotally, I studied philosophy, politics, and economics in Oxford, and that is the classic course for generating leaders, for better or for worse. But from my cohort, not one of the people has taken a political leadership role. And one reason may be, coming back to your question and you want an answer, what does the new generation want? Maybe we want wellness, and there's so much focus on individualism and wellness that it's actually difficult to take up a role in politics because life is expensive, particularly in societies where you don't have a distribution of income like England. It would be very, very expensive for our family to become political leaders. Maybe we need to rethink how politics works.
Right.
I would just like to comment on that. And so it was said that the panelists are all kind of economic drivers, and you've heard from Urška, and I know myself too, that the reason we do what we do is actually from a social benefit. So I started my first venture when I was 17 to give school kids a voice in their education, or another campaign to promote entrepreneurship. So actually we see entrepreneurship as a vehicle for social change. And so yes, politics is a vehicle for change, but in my eyes, it can sometimes be slow and bureaucratic. With entrepreneurship, you can actually have control of what you're doing, and yes, it's difficult, but that's exactly why I've adopted social entrepreneurship as a way of changing the world.
And then to add to that excellent observation, is it enough for us to lead through social entrepreneurship, or do we also need to think about how political structures that get established through legislation, and I speak as a lawyer, protect those incentives? So is it enough for us to be economic and social, or do we also need to be political?
Anyone else want to come in? We're almost coming to the end, but I want to actually quote, if I may, Risto, who's already tweeted what you've been thinking, and I've now lost it, but I'll find it in a moment. Yeah, here we are. This is his view as the organizer. The party political model is out. The entrepreneurial model is the way to change the world. The new generation has spoken. So he summarized what is going forward to the next meeting at 5 o'clock. Can I just, picking up, I think you talk about deadbeats. This is, I say this a bit tongue-in-cheek. I was at a similar meeting yesterday, but with a very formal gathering. And one of the people on the platform actually quoted the NATO Secretary General, Stoltenberg, and said, who was trying to reform NATO, he said, dealing with reform in NATO is like dealing with a cemetery. Every one of the occupants is no use to you. That was obviously going to an extreme, but it was indicative of the frustration there can be for change, and I'm quoting him. Anyone else want to come in?
Sorry.
Please, Travis. Did you want to come in again?
No, I can't let my wife be the only one who speaks.
Is it your son? Is your son going to speak?
Well, he's very, very quiet at the moment, so I'm doing an excellent job in my part of the economy. I think it was very interesting to me that after an hour and a half, we got back to very human values. Rajeeb started talking about failing and resilience. I think Casper talked about self-esteem, and I think April mentioned a sense of belonging. And I think now we're getting to, and then Alex talked about empathy. And this is why, as a doctor, I wasn't that scared when he mentioned that, somebody would be better at diagnosing people with a little chip than I am. Because at the end of the day, it's not about making the diagnosis, it's also about managing the expectations and the feelings. And this is where I think one point we haven't raised at all today is the danger of technology. So we spend, and I'm as addicted to this as anyone else, I spend a huge amount of time on my little phone. People are working in gig economies where they don't have regular hours. And this has a huge impact on how we raise our kids. And I think that's something we need to start thinking about. If you are not looking at your child, if you are not giving them facial expressions because you're looking at a phone while you're breastfeeding them or while you're moving them, or if you are not home to put them to bed, there are certain fundamentals about being a human that cannot be outsourced. And I think we need to really start thinking about how, because otherwise the next generation will be very, very odd. And when it comes to things like self-esteem, we know, what does the next generation want? I think they want fairness. If you give a monkey a treat, but it saw that another monkey got a bigger treat, they will not be happy with their treat. And I think there are issues like that, and we're just really sophisticated monkeys, as that book Sapiens displays. So I think we really need to start thinking about fairness, about looking after each other, and the impact of things like Facebook on self-esteem, on teenage suicide rates. There are all these sort of human factors that we need to start thinking about. And at the moment, that I was glad to see that the arc of the conversation started with, Silicon Valley, and it's sort of finished with empathy. And I think that's quite beautiful.
Can I add one more thing to it?
Oh, yeah.
Not to bring it too much.
Ella, just one moment. How many more people want to come in, please? Travis, yes. Anyone else?
April.
I'll stand up there if you want to look at my shoes as an extrovert, become an extrovert. But anyone else? One more, Travis. Okay, please.
Just to comment on what you said, I agree that we're sort of getting better and better at figuring out what we want, what the values are, and the empathy. I just want to comment, because I'm not sure how many people are aware, and it goes back to the former Prime Minister said, is that even in automation, there's a very big effort in trying to define what we want, because many human values and also values across different populations are not the same. And as we're automating things and essentially equipping automated systems with decision-making tools that they're going to make in real time based on some values that we have, we need to get better at defining those values. So I think part of that is, I believe around 4 years ago, there's been a huge uptick in the artificial intelligence safety research, and specifically about defining human values. And there are many really interesting approaches to making sure whatever automation is, like whatever decisions are made, they have a good shot at reflecting what we want, which we are actually not good at expressing, because there's many contradictory things that humans want. And there's this idea of extrapolated human volitions, of algorithms trying to essentially deduce what humans want and try to design a better way. And it matters because already 40% of the trading is already happening automatically. So it's not as abstract as we think, but there's some progress there, and I'm happy to talk
Thank
about
you.
it.
Travis.
Thank you. So I'm partially responding to your initial question, but I think there's two very basic things that the new generation wants. So I have the pleasure of running a large graduate program at Columbia University with a bunch of energy and environment students who they've dedicated their lives by mortgaging their future to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars to study these things because they want to have impact. So I ask them, what do they want? And I think it comes down to a couple of basic things. One is, they want control over the things that affect their lives. And we have to understand that globalization as a force takes that control away from people. It puts it in the hands of people a very long way away. So things like the sharing economy, things like more municipal governance and control over local things, distributed generation of energy, distributed manufacturing, some of the things that were mentioned, that's, I think, where we get the security that we need to feel the confidence to move forward. But even more than that, the second thing I think that they tell me that they really want is they don't want to have to make a choice between doing well and doing good. Right? They really just don't, they feel like that's a betrayal of their fundamental human condition. And so, Rajiv has made his choice. I'm sure he would be even more enthusiastic about his choice and his social entrepreneurship and mission if it also made a lot of money and was well resourced by people who agreed with him, and I actually, I think he does a pretty good job. But Mark Zuckerberg, he didn't have to make a choice. He created a digital economy and a sharing and a communications platform, and is one of the richest people on the planet. We have to come up with solutions, because ultimately sustainability requires that we don't have to choose between doing well and doing good, and that's what I think the new generation wants.
Thank you very much indeed. Anyone else want to come in? A lot of you haven't said anything. Is anyone sitting on their hands?
Surely Mark Zuckerberg also did a lot of harm. He may potentially have given us Trump, and he's caused a lot of anxiety. People don't publish their failures on Facebook. As a matter of fact, we have a friend from Hannah's time at Oxford who called Johannes Haushofer, who's now professor at Princeton. And he did something really cool a few weeks ago or a few months ago. He published his CV of failures, and he put up every single award he applied for and didn't get. And it was a very long list. And I think this went viral, at least in our little community, but I think it made headlines as well. So
right.
If you Google Princeton CV of failures, it's a massive thing. And I think, so just to say that Zuckerberg didn't have to make a choice, I think that's not quite right.
I've captured an enormous number of what things you've said, both positive and less positive. But let me just ask you all, the five of you up on the platform, do you think those at the top now get the kind of things that you've been saying? Urška, and then I'll go to Rajiv.
Yeah, I was just about to say that maybe we should reverse the conversation of what does new generation want in terms of leading. What does new generation look in the seek for in the leaders. Maybe that's where the things are changing. Maybe we're forgetting, yes, maybe Facebook is not good in some ways of like self-esteem on teenagers and stuff like that. But digital companies like Facebook or like Skype have huge impacts on the communities around them. Like Skype surely had huge impact on how Estonia developed further. So I think entrepreneurship doesn't have to be social to do a lot of good for the communities around it. It can lead with example. It can lead with kind of like glimpses of hope of what can be done. I'm also like proud to see that Bellabit is a hugely important company for the region where I come from, because people saw that it's actually possible to build a successful hardware digital company in the region where this was not previously done. And you don't have to be in Silicon Valley to do that. You can be at home, you can be successful, and you can do stuff that you love doing. So
right.
in that sense, this is the leadership we're looking for. Maybe.
Thank you. We're out of time, but I just want to ask you, Rajiv, do you think those at the top get the enormity of the different expectations which have been highlighted by so many of you, and particularly what Travis has just said about the contradiction and the tension between doing well and doing good?
Yeah, so 100% agree with Travis' point. And I think business leaders are waking up to that point about the change in kind of attitudes, and what is important is not necessarily the top salary that people, it's going to drive the very best talent to come to you. I'm not sure the political leaders have woken up to that fact, and that's why you get some of these surprise results, whether it be Brexit or Trump. It's actually people rebelling and saying, listen to me. Not necessarily that they want that thing. It's just really, hello, I'm here, wake up. And I think the model has to fundamentally change in order for us to really progress further as society.
Thank you. April.
Couldn't agree more with what Travis said. Thank you. Do broadly agree with what Raj just said in terms of who's waking up and who's not. Business leaders gradually, I think I have counseled and advised, I feel like countless entrepreneurs who began, 99 times out of 100, an entrepreneur begins as a social entrepreneur, or at least believing that a social mission is possible to embed in their business model. And they go further and further down, especially the venture capital track, and they find themselves cornered into this place where they're like, this has nothing to do with what I originally started doing. How did this happen? So I think if we keep whittling away at that model and that paradigm and that mindset, so to speak, and we haven't talked a lot about venture capital today, start looking at blended value, social venture capital, different forms of debt, equity, you name it, future philanthropy, that's probably another conference in and of itself. I think we actually get there. But by and large today, I say I'm kind of like 1/3 maybe gets it, 1/3 is out to lunch, and 1/3 doesn't get it at all. I just want to put a footnote on my comments. I really want to challenge all of us to rethink, what do we think of when we say leadership? Because out of this industrial era, and the whole bigger is better, and the more you own, the more valuable you are, and all of this has led also to a lot of kind of, I would term egocentric leadership. So we look at with all due respect to prime ministers, the prime minister is the leader, the CEO is the leader. I have no issue with that per se, but actually, I think the new generation of leaders, and particularly through network technologies, the best leaders to me aren't the person with the fancy placard and the title. They are the people that can best identify the leadership capacities in others, harness them, bring them together to do more than any one individual could do. That's
April.
the leader, and they don't show up necessarily on the front headlines.
Thank you very much indeed. You've set the tone for whenever we gather again. I should tell you, of course, Rajiv, that 2025 is about 5 hours from now, so it's not 8 years away. So, you know, this is the speed at which things are happening. Can I thank you all enormously? I hope all of you got something to take away from this, which is enriching, sobering, maybe worrying, but also a springboard for where things are going. It certainly helps set the tone for those who will be in here later. Some of you will be here as well. But Yomo, do you want to wind up at all? Okay, you're happy for me to wind up. Risto. Yeah, that taking it forward in a very dynamic sense is really important. So please do take a moment to think about that, because if you think this has been worth your time, then the next one can be worth your time even more so. Thank you all very much indeed, and it's been a pleasure to be here to help make the conversation work in the way that we hoped. Thank you.